Alexandria Ocasio Cortez thought she was just walking into another routine congressional hearing, ready for the cameras. But Senator John Kennedy had her entire 7-year legislative record sitting quietly in a single folder, and he was about to ask the one devastating question she simply could not post her way out of. As someone who has spent years in the political arena, sitting in those very committee chairs and speaking to the American people from this broadcast desk, I can tell you that what unfolded today was not just another fleeting viral moment. It was a profound televised autopsy of modern political performativity. We are looking at a representative who in 7 long years in Congress has not passed a single bill into law. Not one. She boasts 8.6 million Instagram followers. She commands magazine covers. She makes headlines with her Met Gala dresses. And she secures more cable news appearances than most of her colleagues have committee meetings. Yet she represents a district spanning the Bronx and Queens where the rent has painfully increased every single year since she took her oath of office. Today, Senator John Kennedy laid that stark reality on the table. Let us set the scene in that hearing room because the body language alone told a story of a generational divide. Representative Ocasio Cortez sat there with one elbow resting casually on the table, her chin tilted upward at an angle that wasn't quite defiance and wasn't quite confidence, but rather the calculated posture of a person who has been photographed 10,000 times and knows exactly which angle the cameras favor. She launched her opening salvo by framing the senator sitting across from her as a relic of a generation responsible for building the very systems, the housing crisis, the climate crisis, the inequality crisis, the healthcare crisis that she claims her movement is actively trying to fix. She dismissed these as old problems created by old policies, zealously defended by people who have been entrenched in government for so long that they have tragically confused mere inertia with genuine experience. And notice her technique. She didn't direct this attack at Senator Kennedy. She physically turned toward the cameras, turning toward the lens, because that is the audience she truly wanted to reach. She pointedly stated that the senator had been in Washington since before she was even born, questioning whether anything in his home state of Louisiana had actually improved during his tenure. She asked if poverty had gone down, if health care had gotten better, or if a single working family in his state had ever woken up and thanked God for his presence in the Senate. She claimed to respect the institution, but she made it unequivocally clear that she does not confuse seniority with results. She suggested that some people in the building had been there for decades with absolutely nothing to show for it except a reserved parking spot and a taxpayer-funded pension. She let the word pension hang in the air with a half smile, a direct jab calling him old and useless in front of the entire country. Through all of this, Senator Kennedy hadn't even opened his folder yet, the folder that contains 7 years of her record and one highly revealing document authored by her own campaign explaining why she single-handedly killed 25,000 jobs for her own district. Kennedy's reaction was a masterclass in political composure. He did not rush to respond. He sat through the insult the way a seasoned man sits through a passing storm, unhurried, unsurprised, and steadfastly remaining when the weather clears. His hands remain neatly folded on the table, his glasses resting at the end of his nose, his mouth firmly closed. He allowed the echo of her voice to settle deeply into the room, into the carpet, into the wood paneling, and up into the gallery where the audience was still mentally processing the weight of the word pension. He waited 3 seconds. Then 4. Slowly, he took off his glasses and cleaned them with the hem of his tie. It was a small, almost domestic gesture that seemed entirely out of place in a formal Senate hearing, yet it belonged there perfectly because it communicated to everyone watching that this was a man who was not in a hurry and he wanted the entire room to know it. When he put his glasses back on and finally spoke, his voice was measured deliberately slower than his usual cadence, letting the Louisiana drawl take its full width, giving each vowel the space it was born to occupy. "Well, ma'am, you're right about one thing," he said. Nodding, once the kind of nod a person gives when conceding a trivial point they simply don't consider important enough to argue over. "I am old. I've been old for a while now. I was old when you were bartending. I was old when you ran for Congress, and I'll probably be old when you're done in Congress too, which, at the rate you're going, Might be sooner than you think. Up in the gallery, a man pressed his lips together, looking down at his hands. Whether he was suppressing a smile or just composing himself, the camera couldn't quite capture. Kennedy paused, not for theatrical effect, but out of genuine memory. His eyes seemed to focus on something far beyond the marble walls and the microphones of the hearing room. But here's the thing about being old, Congresswoman, he continued, his voice dropping half a register, not increasing in volume, but gaining a deeper resonance, the way a voice naturally deepens when recalling something fundamentally real. Old means I remember. I remember when a factory worker in your district could actually pay rent with just one single paycheck. I remember when families in Queens proudly owned their homes. Owned them, ma'am, with a mortgage and a mailbox and a key of their own, instead of sleeping 3 to a room in a cramped basement apartment. I remember when a person from the Bronx could walk into a business on a Monday morning and secure a job by Monday afternoon. Not a gig, not a side hustle, not a chaotic 3-hour shift delivering food for an app on a phone. A real job with solid benefits and a pension. He let that exact word pension sit there in the room. It was the very same word she had hurled as an insult just 30 seconds prior, but in his mouth it carried an entirely different weight. It meant stability, dignity, and a future. You want to talk about what my generation built? He asked, finally opening the folder. We built the middle class in your district, and I am sitting here today because I would dearly like to know what happened to it. Then came the legislative cross-examination. You have served in the United States Congress for 7 years, Kennedy stated. In that time, how many bills that you sponsored have actually become law? Ocasio Cortez immediately pivoted to political abstraction. She argued that effective legislating isn't measured by the sheer number of bills carrying a senator's name, but rather by the movements one builds and the cultural conversations one shifts. Ma'am, it's a number, Kennedy interrupted gently, employing the patient tone of a veteran teacher who knows a student is dodging the question and has decided to quietly wait for the answer. How many? She countered by stating she had introduced significant legislation, explicitly naming the Green New Deal, which she claimed fundamentally reshaped the discourse. Introduced, not passed, Kennedy corrected, peering sharply over the rims of his glasses. He pulled the first page from his folder. The answer is 0, Congresswoman. In 7 years, you have not passed a single piece of legislation into law. Not one. GovTrack, the nonpartisan congressional tracker, not a Republican organization, not some conservative blog, ranked you 230th out of 240 Democrats in legislative effectiveness in the 116th Congress. 230th. He set that page firmly on the table. 0 bills. He then pulled a second page. 8.6 million Instagram followers, he noted, placing it beside the first document. 11 days on the House floor in the entire 117th Congress. 11, but 412 Instagram posts in that exact same period. He allowed those stark numbers to sit side by side, much like letting 2 contrasting photographs rest next to each other in an album. He wasn't arguing. He was simply showing the reality. You spoke on the floor of the United States House of Representatives, the very floor your constituents elected you to stand on, just 11 times in 2 years. Yet, you posted on Instagram 412 times. He folded his hands. That is a ratio. Congresswoman, and ratios tell stories even when the people in them desperately don't want them to. Turning to the next page, Kennedy shifted his tone. His voice moved closer, becoming more intimate. The way a voice shifts when the topic moves from cold statistics to real human beings. Your district, the 14th, spans the Bronx and Queens. Median rent has risen every single year you have been in office. Poverty in the South Bronx is sitting over 30%. NYC public housing buildings in your district, the very buildings where the poorest of your constituents live, have gone through freezing winters without heat, without hot water, with mold creeping up the walls and rats running through the hallways. You know this, Congresswoman. You've done the PR tours, you've taken the dramatic photographs, you've posted about it online. He paused. This wasn't a pause for dramatic flair. It was a pause to emphasize the vast, tragic distance between posting about a problem and actually fixing it, the unbridgeable chasm between a photograph of mold and a signed law that legally mandates its removal. But you haven't fixed it in 7 years. You haven't passed a bill that fixes it. You haven't even gotten a bill to the floor that fixes it. You have merely posted about it, and the posting is not the fixing, Congresswoman. Your constituents cannot live inside an Instagram story. In the fourth row of the gallery, an older, gray-haired woman sitting alone with her purse on her lap nodded once. It wasn't a performative nod. It was a deeply private acknowledgement from someone who had been waiting a very long time to hear something said out loud that they had been thinking in silence. Kennedy pressed on. There are children growing up right now in your district in the Bronx, in public housing apartments with mold on the ceiling, who will turn 18 before you ever pass your first bill into law. What exactly will you tell them you did for them? He looked at her intently over his glasses. That you went to the Met Gala? That you successfully garnered 8.6 million followers? A child in NYC housing with mold on his wall cannot eat a follower, Congresswoman. Ocasio Cortez leaned forward, her elbows finding the table as her hands clasped together. When she spoke, her voice took on that particular precision she uses when building an argument she fervently believes in, laying down each word like a brick to construct a load-bearing sentence. She insisted that effective legislation is not measured by what she called vanity metrics, but by the movements built, the conversation shifted, and the moving of the Overton window. She argued that before she entered Congress, nobody in the building was discussing a Green New Deal, a federal jobs guarantee, or the massive scale of investment the country needs to survive the next 50 years. She claimed that putting those conversations on the table is what true leadership looks like in the 21st century. Addressing the social media critique, she defended her Instagram use, arguing that she goes to where the people actually are, on their phones, in their kitchens, on their breaks at work, rather than speaking to an empty chamber on C-SPAN at 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, and pretending that constitutes legislating. Behind her, a staffer made a small, entirely unnecessary gesture, adjusting the collar of her blazer. It was the kind of nervous, triumphant movement a person makes when they believe their principal has just landed a decisive rhetorical blow. Kennedy watched and waited for the gesture to finish. He let the air carry her defensive words for a few seconds longer than was comfortable, much like politely letting a guest finish a toast before raising your own glass to deliver the reality check. Then he spoke, and the sheer slowness of his delivery was the weapon itself. Congresswoman, you say you moved the Overton window. I'm sure you did, he said with a nod. But the people in your district do not live in the Overton window. They live in apartments with mold on the walls and landlords who coldly raise the rent every single January. And you cannot move a rent payment by simply moving a conversation. You move a rent payment by passing a law. He unfolded his hands, then refolded them deliberately, and you haven't passed one. The staffer behind her stopped adjusting the blazer. Then Kennedy moved to the core economic tragedy of her tenure. Now I want to talk about the 25,000 jobs, he said. Reading the historical facts the way a meticulous lawyer reads a property deed at a closing, laying out the dates, the names, the numbers, and the severe consequences. In 2018, Amazon announced plans to build a second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens, directly adjacent to your district. 25,000 jobs. An average salary of $150,000. Expected to generate $27 billion in tax revenue for New York over 20 years. Your own governor, Andrew Cuomo, a Democrat, supported it. Your mayor, Bill de Blasio, a Democrat, supported it. The local community board supported it. The construction unions heavily supported it. 25,000 families, Congresswoman, were going to have solid, high-paying jobs. But you opposed it. You aggressively campaigned against it. You called it, and I'm reading your exact words here, corporate greed and worker exploitation. And on the 14th of February 2019, Valentine's Day, appropriately enough, Amazon pulled completely out of New York. They took the 25,000 jobs. They took the billions in tax revenue. They took the 2 decades of promised economic development, and they moved it all to Virginia. He placed 2 pages side by side on the table. On the left was a printout of her celebratory tweet from that day. Today was the day a group of dedicated, everyday New Yorkers defeated Amazon's corporate greed, its worker exploitation, and the power of the richest man in the world. On the right were the cold, hard numbers: 25,000 jobs, $150,000 average salary, $27 billion in tax revenue. Enish, no paychecks, nothing. Your own governor, Andrew Cuomo, a Democrat, not a Republican, not a conservative talk show host, called it a lost economic opportunity caused by a small group of politicians who put their own narrow political interests above their community. Kennedy looked up, holding her gaze. Your governor said that about you, Congresswoman. He turned the page, and the small businesses in Queens that had been eagerly preparing for 25,000 new customers, the restaurants, the laundromats, the bodegas, the daycare centers that had bravely started hiring, started renovating, started believing that something in their lives was finally about to get better. They prepared for a massive economic boom that you unilaterally canceled. He set the page down with a quiet thud. Some of them permanently closed, not because of the national economy, not because of the free market, because of you. Then Kennedy reached beneath the stack and produced one final damning document. Now, Congresswoman, I want to read you something your own campaign wrote. This is an internal polling memo successfully obtained by this committee from a former staffer. He adjusted his glasses and read the memo slowly, giving each percentage its proper weight, letting the unfeeling math do the heavy lifting the way math always does when you let it. Your campaign polling team ran the numbers on the Amazon deal. They comprehensively surveyed your district. 67% of likely voters in your district, 67, Congresswoman, that is 2 out of every 3 people you are supposed to represent supported the Amazon headquarters. He looked up again to ensure she heard it. They desperately wanted the jobs. He continued reading the memo. But 84% of your national donor base, the people who generously donate to your campaign from places like California, Massachusetts, and Oregon, the people who follow you on social media, the people who have never walked a single block in Queens opposed the deal. He then read the strategic recommendation at the bottom of the memo, his voice devoid of theatrical change, and that very absence of change was deeply chilling. The district numbers favor the deal, but the donor and brand numbers are clear. Opposing Amazon aligns with the national progressive lane. Recommend opposing. He set the final page down at the very end of the row of documents. The donor and brand numbers are clear, he repeated, letting the cynicism of that phrase wash over the room. Your own campaign explicitly told you that your district wanted those jobs, Congresswoman, 2 out of 3. And your campaign told you to kill the deal, not because it was fundamentally bad for Queens, but because opposing it was incredibly good for your personal political brand. You didn't kill 25,000 jobs because it was the right thing to do for the working class people who live on your street. You systematically killed them because it polled exceptionally well with wealthy people who donate to your campaign from 3,000 miles away and who have never once set foot in your district. The people of Queens wanted jobs. Your donors wanted a snappy headline. He folded his hands. You purposely chose the headline. Her own campaign knew the district wanted the jobs, 67% of them, yet she killed the deal for donors 3,000 miles away. Kennedy then stood up. He walked the entire length of the committee table, walking slowly, lightly touching each printed page as he passed it. The abysmal legislative record, the glaring Instagram ratio, the disastrous Amazon numbers, the cynical polling memo. Each touch represented a year in office, and each year represented a failure, and the failures added up quietly in the room until someone finally bothered to count them out loud. 0 bills in 7 years touch, 230 out of 240 inches effectiveness touch. 11 days on the House floor, 412 Instagram posts touch, 25,000 jobs killed, touch, a polling memo that says your district wanted those jobs and your donors didn't touch. He stopped at the end of the table, turned, and looked at her directly across that damning row of white pages. You called me old, Congresswoman, and you're absolutely right. I am old. I'm old enough to vividly remember when the word representative actually meant something. His voice now carried the heavy burden of a vital truth that has been carried a very long time and is finally being set down carefully for all to see. It meant you represent the people who actually elected you, not the people who donate to your PAC from a zip code you've never even visited. Not the people who follow you on Instagram. Not the elites who invite you to their fancy galas. It meant you represent the people who live on your street, the people who take the grimy subway every morning, the people whose children are forced to go to school in buildings with toxic mold on the ceiling. He paused, and when he spoke his final words, his tone shifted to a quieter, more haunting register, a place far beyond cold numbers, ratios, or legislative statistics. It was about a vulnerable child in a rundown apartment in the Bronx who had absolutely no idea she was being discussed in the halls of power. There is a little girl in the Bronx right now. Maybe she's 7 years old, maybe 8. She lives in NYC public housing, the very housing that you have eagerly photographed, posted about, and toured with national reporters. She walks to school every morning past a desolate, vacant lot where a bustling factory used to be. She comes home to a freezing apartment where the heat simply doesn't turn on in the dead of January. And when she grows up, when she is old enough to read, old enough to look things up on the internet, and old enough to ask the hard questions, she is going to look at your record, Congresswoman. And she is going to ask, what did you actually do for me? And you are going to desperately try to tell her about the Overton window and the Green New Deal that never passed, and the viral Instagram posts, and the stunning Met Gala dress, and she is going to look at you and say what every child eventually says to a person who made grand promises and utterly failed to keep them. He took off his glasses, carefully folded them, and set them gently on the table beside the final page. That's it. He let those devastating questions sit in the room, sinking heavily like a stone dropped to the bottom of a deep well, heavy, immovable, and not going anywhere. You confidently said, my generation broke things, Congresswoman. Maybe we did, but when we broke things, we also built things. We built factories, highways, roads, schools, and hospitals. We proudly put them up with our own bare hands, our own strong backs, and our own hard-earned tax dollars. You haven't built anything, not one single thing in 7 years. And the absolute only thing you have managed to tear down is 25,000 jobs that your own working-class people desperately wanted. He sat down heavily. That's the record, not mine, yours. When the chairman formally asked if the gentlewoman from New York wished to respond, Ocasio-Cortez opened her mouth defensively. I have dedicated my career, and then the word career arrived in the tense air between her and the live microphone, and something visceral happened to it on the way. She heard herself say it. She heard the sheer weight of the word career. The 7 empty years it now fully contained, the 0 passed bills it now heavily carried, and it abruptly stopped her sentence the exact way a massive stone stops a rolling wheel. Her chin, which had been tilted defiantly upward since the very moment she sat down, the precise angle that was her famous signature, her brazen dare, her carefully curated brand came down. It wasn't dramatically done. It wasn't a total collapse, just a slight lowering of 1/4 of an inch, the way a proud flag slowly lowers when the wind finally dies. Her eyes drifted away from Kennedy, moving down to the table, to the pages, scanning the relentless row of white rectangles that undeniably contained her entire hollow record. Her hands retreated to her lap, safely below the table and out of the camera's view. My record, she finally stammered, followed by a painful space where the next confident word should have been, is a work in progress. 6 words. It was the quietest, most defeated sentence she had ever spoken in a public congressional hearing. Up in the gallery, the older, gray-haired woman who had nodded privately during Kennedy's speech looked down at Ocasio-Cortez with the disappointed expression of a grandmother looking at a grandchild who has just been caught doing something terrible and is not yet mature enough to comprehend the true size of their mistake. Kennedy replied very gently, "A work in progress. Yes, ma'am." He paused for a final time. For the desperate people of your district, it's been a work in progress for 7 long years. They'd really like to see some results. And my friends, the clip traveled the way these digital things travel in our modern age, terrifyingly fast, completely unstoppable, and in 2 distinct versions. The short version, 60 blistering seconds, highlighting the 0 bills, the 8.6 million followers, the 11 days on the floor versus 412 Instagram posts, ending with the devastating line, "They don't live in the Overton window," hit an astonishing 40 million views in just 48 hours. But the long version, the full 21 minutes from "I am old" to "That's the record," was the kind of substantive video everyday working people watched on their large televisions in their living rooms, sitting alone or with their spouse in the quiet evening, with the volume turned all the way up, because it articulated something they had been deeply feeling for a very long time, but had not heard any politician say out loud. The political fallout was immediate. 4 Democratic members of the New York delegation rushed to release statements within 24 hours. Interestingly, none mentioned Ocasio-Cortez by name, but all pointedly used the word accountability. The FEC swiftly opened a preliminary review of her campaign's polling memo. Meanwhile, Amazon's public relations office issued a brutal one-line statement that communicated more in its extreme brevity than any multi-page press release ever could. The offer for New York remains on the table. The hashtag #TheirCourt dominated national trending topics for 3 solid days. Let me tell you about the real-world consequences of this performative politics beyond the Beltway chatter. That very evening, a man named Miguel sat in his daughter's cramped living room in Astoria, Queens, watching the full, long version of the hearing on the television. Miguel was a hardworking man who had proudly owned a neighborhood laundromat in Long Island City, situated just 2 blocks from the barren site where Amazon's headquarters was supposed to be built. Back in 2018, when the massive economic announcement first came, Miguel had started actively planning for his future. He planned to hire 2 more local employees, extend his operating hours, repaint his aging storefront, and proudly put up a brand new sign in both English and Spanish that read "Grand Reopening," because he knew his neighborhood was about to fundamentally change for the better, and he desperately wanted to change and grow alongside it. But then his own congresswoman relentlessly campaigned against the deal to boost her national profile. Amazon understandably left. The flood of new customers who were supposed to revitalize the area never arrived. Miguel's commercial lease came up for renewal. His rent skyrocketed in anticipation of a boom that never happened, and the customers simply weren't there to pay for it. By March of 2020, heartbroken and financially ruined, Miguel permanently closed the doors of his laundromat and was forced to move in with his daughter because he had absolutely nowhere else to go. Sitting there watching the television, he heard Senator Kennedy say 25,000 jobs, and Miguel quietly thought to himself, "I didn't need 25,000. I just needed 25 new customers a day. That is all it would have taken to save my business a tiny fraction of a fraction of what Amazon would have brought to my street." And his representative took it all away. Miguel didn't take out his phone to share the viral video. He didn't fire off an angry post on social media about it. He just turned off the television and sat in the heavy quiet of his daughter's living room, sitting in a chair that was not his, living in a house that was not his, thinking about a bustling storefront in Long Island City that had proudly borne his name on the lease for 14 incredible years and now coldly belonged to someone else. It is the kind of devastating thinking a man does when he is 63 years old, has entirely lost the one thing he spent his life building, and knows deep down he is simply too old to ever build another one. Far away from Queens, sitting on his quiet porch in Madisonville, Louisiana, John Kennedy relaxed with a glass of iced tea that had slowly gone warm. His wife, Becky, had watched the entire explosive hearing on their kitchen television, but hadn't asked him a single question about it, possessing the deep understanding of a spouse who knows when a man doesn't need to talk. But Kennedy spoke anyway. He wasn't reflecting on his massive viral victory or the mechanics of the hearing. He was thinking about the human cost. "There's a little girl in the Bronx, Becky," he murmured into the Louisiana night, 7, 8 years old. "Lives in public housing, mold creeping up the walls. The heat doesn't work for half the winter." He took a slow sip of the warm tea, set the glass down, and sighed. And her congresswoman has been sitting in office for 7 years and hasn't managed to pass a single law that helps her. Not one. 7 years and 0 laws, but hey, she has 8.6 million followers. The Southern crickets were loud, the tea was warm, and the evening was the specific kind of heavy Louisiana night that seems to hold absolutely everything. The thick heat, the ambient sound, and the slow, profound weight of a day that truly mattered to the country without letting any of it slip away. "I feel deeply sorry for that district, Becky. I truly do," he confessed, because she is never going to fix a single thing for those working people. She is simply too busy being famous to actually do the hard work. Meanwhile, alone in her luxurious apartment in Washington, D.C., Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat silently at her kitchen table with her laptop open before her. The glowing screen illuminated her face as her Instagram notifications endlessly cascaded down the display. The comments section had viciously split into 2 warring columns, resembling a chaotic river violently hitting a massive rock. On one side, her blind supporters were frantically typing praises like queen and icon and reassuring her that they're just scared of you. On the other side, a tidal wave of critics mercilessly typed out "zero bills and record," repeating Kennedy's devastating line over and over again, the one quote that absolutely would not stop circulating across the internet: "They don't live in the Overton window." She scrolled through the noise. She read the brutal critique. She scrolled some more. And then deliberately, she closed the laptop screen. She closed it slowly, the exact way a person shuts a book that has just revealed a painful truth they desperately wish they hadn't read. She looked out her window at the sprawling Washington evening, watching the grand monuments and federal buildings going dark one solitary light at a time. In that profound quiet, she thought about the hypothetical little girl in the Bronx. She had never genuinely thought about her before. Kennedy so vividly described her in that hearing room, but now, sitting alone in the dark, she simply could not stop. A 7-year-old girl. NYC public housing. Toxic mold on the bedroom ceiling. Walking to school past a desolate, vacant lot where a bustling Amazon campus and thousands of jobs were supposed to be. And Kennedy's final devastating question, delivered in a voice that managed to be gentle and utterly destructive in equal measure, sat rigidly in the kitchen with her like an unwanted guest who absolutely refused to leave. "What did you do for me?" The factual, unspinable answer was 0. And 0 is not a number you can cleverly post your way out of on social media. 0 is not a cultural conversation you can smoothly shift. 0 is not an Overton window you can progressively move. 0 is just 0. It is the absolute emptiest number there is in mathematics and in politics. It is the number that unequivocally means nothing was there, and nothing is exactly what the permanent congressional record said. The record was the record, and it was undeniably hers. 0 bills passed in 7 long years. 25,000 good-paying jobs killed. An internal polling memo proving her own district desperately wanted those jobs, and her wealthy donors didn't. Faced with the choice of serving her neighbors or feeding her brand, she willfully chose the donors. Subscribe to our channel, folks, and please leave one word in the comments to describe this record. Share this video with someone who still remembers when the title of representative actually meant you represented the real, everyday people on their street.